Zektar's reflexes were faster than thought, the product of millions of years of evolution and decades of combat experience. His claws extended to full combat length as he spun toward the voice, his personal shields flaring to maximum intensity. His weapon came up with practiced precision, targeting sensors locked onto the human center mass. The barrel of his plasma rifle met the edge of a human hand moving with impossible speed. Sarah Chun's palm strike redirected the weapon's aim, just enough to send the discharge harmlessly into the ancient stone ceiling, while her other hand delivered a precise blow to the nerve cluster at the base of Zektar's neck. The Kethpak leader staggered, his weapon clattering across the chamber floor. The strike should have been nothing more than an annoyance. Human muscle density was inferior to Keth physiology by every measurable standard. But the blow had been delivered with surgical accuracy to the one vulnerable point in his nervous system that could bypass his natural armor. And the strength behind it spoke of enhancement that shouldn't have existed. "Impossible," he hissed, backing away from this creature that looked like prey but fought like something from a nightmare. Human strength is insufficient to penetrate Keth defenses. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center of the chamber, her breathing calm despite 6 hours of tactical maneuvering. "You're thinking in terms of raw force," she said conversationally, as if they were discussing theoretical physics rather than engaged in mortal combat. "That's the mistake most species make about humans. They see our physical limitations and assume that's all we are." She began to circle him slowly, her movements flowing like water around stone. "What you missed in your intelligence files is that humans don't fight with their muscles. We fight with our minds. Every weakness becomes a strength when you know how to apply leverage correctly." Zektar's thermal sensors painted her as calm, relaxed, showing none of the stress indicators he expected from someone facing a superior predator. Her heat signature was actually cooling as she moved, her heart rate dropping to levels that suggested deep meditation rather than combat. It was as if the presence of mortal danger had triggered some kind of enhanced state rather than panic. "Your species has been hunting civilians," Sarah continued, her voice carrying the same clinical detachment she might use to describe a particularly interesting specimen. "Researchers, colonists, children, people with no military training and no understanding of galactic predator species. You've been fighting opponents who never knew they were in a war?" She paused directly in front of him, well within the reach of his claws, but somehow radiating confidence rather than vulnerability. "I'm different. I've been fighting wars since I was old enough to hold a rifle. I've seen what happens when predator species underestimate human adaptability, and I volunteered for this mission specifically to send a message." "What message?" He snarled, his claws flexing involuntarily. "That hunting season is over." The attack came without warning, a blur of motion that bypassed every defensive system Zektar possessed. Sarah's hand found the activation stud for his personal shield generator, disabling it with casual precision while her foot swept his legs from under him. As he fell, she caught his descending head and redirected its momentum into the stone floor with enough force to crack both skull and ancient rock. Zektar's vision blurred, his enhanced senses overwhelmed by the sudden shift from hunter to helpless. When his sight cleared, he found himself bound with restraints that looked like simple polymer strips but held with the strength of molecular bonds. The human stood over him, no longer bothering to maintain her harmless facade. "The restraints are a human invention called smart cuffs," she explained, checking her wrist display. "They respond to resistance by tightening automatically. The more you struggle, the more they restrict your circulation. I recommend staying calm." She moved to a section of wall that looked identical to every other piece of stone in the chamber and pressed her hand against a specific point. Hidden panels slid aside, revealing equipment that made Zektar's advanced sensors look primitive by comparison. Communication arrays, targeting computers, and weapon systems that incorporated design principles his species engineers were still trying to understand. "This isn't human technology," he whispered. "You're partially correct," Sarah replied, activating what appeared to be a quantum communication device. The base components are human, but we've made some interesting modifications over the past few years. Turns out that when your species started hunting our civilians, Earth decided it was time to accelerate our technology development program. The quantum transmitter came online with a soft hum, its display showing connection protocols that spanned light years in real time. Control, this is Hunter 1. Package secure, mission parameters exceeded. Request immediate pickup and prisoner transport. The response came instantly, the voice crackling with authority and satisfaction. Hunter 1, this is Control. Excellent work. Fleet assets are already en route to your position. Estimated arrival in 30 minutes. Fleet assets. Zektar's blood turned to ice as the implications hit him. This wasn't a lone human with stolen technology. This was a coordinated military operation involving ships, personnel, and planning that went far beyond anything his species had imagined humans capable of. You set this up, he realized. The survey mission, the separation from your team, even being alone in Keth hunting territory. All of it was planned. Every detail, Sarah confirmed, checking her equipment with methodical precision. Earth Alliance intelligence has been tracking consortium operations for 8 months. We know your base locations, your client lists, your operational patterns, and your command structure. This mission was just the beginning. She turned back to him, and for the first time, Zektar saw something in her eyes that made his predator instincts scream warnings. Not anger or hatred, but the cold, calculating look of someone who had moved beyond emotion into pure tactical thinking. Your people made a mistake when you started taking our children, she said quietly. Humans can forgive a lot of things. We can negotiate, compromise, even overlook crimes against our adults if there's sufficient cause. But when someone threatens our young, we stop being civilized. The sound of engines echoed through the ruins, growing louder as ships descended through the atmosphere. Not the sleek, efficient vessels of advanced galactic civilizations, but the blunt, aggressive designs that spoke of a species that had learned warfare in the hard school of planetary survival. How? Zektar demanded. Your species barely achieved interstellar flight. Your technology is primitive. Your understanding of galactic politics is laughably naive. You're right about all of that, Sarah agreed. 6 months ago, everything you just said was accurate, but you underestimated one fundamental aspect of human nature. Our ability to adapt under pressure. The chamber filled with the sound of boots on stone as figures in combat armor entered through passages Zektar hadn't known existed. Human soldiers moving with the coordinated precision of a species that had been fighting wars for millennia. Their equipment looked crude compared to galactic standards, but their tactics were flawless and their confidence was absolute. When you started hunting our people, Sarah continued, Earth made a decision. Every resource, every scientist, every engineer was redirected toward a single goal, making sure that the next time humans encountered galactic predators, we wouldn't be the prey. One of the soldiers approached and saluted. Ma'am, the transport is ready for prisoner transfer. Intel wants to debrief him immediately. Understood, Sarah replied. Make sure he's comfortable. We're going to learn everything there is to know about consortium operations. As the soldiers lifted Zektar to transport him to the waiting ship, he found his voice one final time. This won't end with me. The consortium has resources across 100 star systems. We have allies, clients, political connections. One human operation cannot threaten an organization that spans the galaxy. Sarah's smile was cold as winter on a dead world. You're thinking too small, she said. This isn't one human operation. This is humanity learning what we're really capable of when someone gives us proper motivation. She gestured toward the quantum communicator, where status reports were flowing in from operations across known space. Right now, human ships are moving against every consortium facility in this sector. Every hunting pack, every client base, every supplier and support operation. We've spent 6 months preparing for this moment. Zektar felt something he had never experienced before in his long career as a predator, genuine fear. Not the momentary concern of a hunt gone wrong, but the deep, existential terror of realizing that his entire species might have awakened something that couldn't be controlled. "Your government will never approve extended military action," he said desperately. "Humans are peaceful by nature. You lack the will for sustained conflict." "You're confusing peaceful with weak," Sarah replied. "We're peaceful because we know what we're capable of when we're not. But when someone forces our hand by threatening our children, they discover that humans can be the most dangerous predators in the galaxy." The soldiers carried him toward the exit, but Sarah's voice followed him through the ancient corridors. "Tell your superiors something when they debrief you," she. Hixtall was the first to die. Though none of his pack brothers would know it for several crucial minutes, the tracker had been moving through what appeared to be a collapsed corridor when the molecular wire caught him at throat level. The nearly invisible strand, thinner than human hair but stronger than titanium, sliced through his armored hide with surgical precision. His final transmission was cut short mid-syllable, leaving only the soft thud of his massive body hitting the ancient stone floor in the central chamber. Sarah monitored her tactical display with clinical detachment. One target neutralized, 2 remaining. The Keth were professional hunters, but their professionalism was built around overwhelming technological superiority and pack tactics. They weren't prepared for an environment where their prey had turned the terrain itself into a weapon. "Hixtall, report," Zektara's voice crackled through the ruined stone corridors. The pack leader's thermal signature showed, him advancing cautiously through what had once been the structure's main approach route. Sarah had left that path deliberately clear, knowing that experienced hunters would be suspicious of obvious traps but might overlook subtle ones. When no response came, Zektara's posture shifted on her sensors. The confident predator's stride became more measured. More cautious? Good. Doubt was the first crack in the armor of superiority. "Velthic, can you reach Hixtall's position?" "Negative, pack leader. Too much interference from the stone. These ruins contain trace amounts of some kind of mineral that's disrupting our communications array." Another lie, though Velthic didn't know it. The mineral interference came from a dozen small jamming devices Sarah had placed throughout the structure during her initial reconnaissance. Earth Alliance intelligence had learned the hard way that divided enemies were weaker enemies. And nothing divided a pack more effectively than broken communication. Sarah's fingers moved across her wrist display, activating the next phase of her plan. Throughout the ruins, hidden charges began their countdown sequence. Not enough to bring down the entire structure. She needed some of it intact for what came next, but sufficient to reshape the battlefield to her advantage. Zektar heard the first explosion from somewhere deeper in the ruins, a muffled rumble that sent dust cascading from the ancient ceiling. His forked tongue tasted the air, detecting new scents of burning metal and ozone. The human was using some kind of demolition charges, probably a desperate attempt to create barriers or collapse passages. "Clever little prey," he hissed to himself. The human was showing more tactical awareness than their intelligence files had suggested. No matter. Desperation sometimes made inferior species surprisingly resourceful, but it also made them predictable. She was trying to channel his approach, force him into a confrontation on her terms. It was exactly the kind of primitive thinking he expected from a species that had barely mastered interstellar travel. He activated his personal shield generator and continued forward. Claws extended to full combat length. Let the human play her games. When he finally cornered her, he would take extra time with the killing. Clients paid premium prices for recordings of defiant prey. And this one was proving more defiant than most. The corridor ahead opened into what his sensors indicated was a large chamber. Perfect. Open spaces favored the superior reach and agility of Keth warriors. He could end this hunt with a single decisive strike. Zektar entered the chamber at full speed, expecting to find a cowering human with makeshift barricades and desperate last stands. Instead, he found shadows and silence. His thermal sensors painted the space as empty, but his instincts screamed warnings that his technological confidence chose to ignore. The plasma bolt that burned past his head came from a position that should have been impossible to reach. His personal shields flared to life, absorbing the energy discharge, but the shot had been precise enough to disable his primary weapon's targeting system. Whoever had fired it knew exactly where to aim for maximum tactical effect. "Impossible," he snarled, whirling toward the source of the attack. Humans use primitive kinetic weapons, not plasma technology. Their understanding of energy manipulation was centuries behind galactic standards. The weapon signature he was detecting should not have existed in human hands. A second shot answered his confusion, this one coming from an entirely different angle. His shields held but barely. The plasma discharges were using a frequency modulation that seemed specifically calibrated to overcome Keth's defensive systems. Someone had done their homework. "Velthik!" he roared into his communicator. "The human has advanced weapons. I need immediate support." Only static answered him. The jamming effect was getting stronger, which meant the human had multiple devices and was activating them in sequence. This level of preparation suggested planning that went far beyond desperate improvisation. Velthik had problems of his own. The corridor he had been following had suddenly become a maze of fallen debris and newly opened passages. The explosions had changed the internal geography of the ruins, forcing him to navigate by sound and scent rather than his usual sensor array. The mineral interference was indeed getting worse. As if whatever was in the stone was reacting to their presence. He had found Hickstel S-body 15 minutes ago, and the discovery had changed everything. The precise nature of the wound, the surgical accuracy of the killing stroke, the complete absence of defensive wounds. This was not the work of a panicked scientist with improvised weapons. This was the work of a trained killer. "Pack leader, respond," he called into his communicator, knowing he was unlikely to get an answer. The human had separated them, jammed their communications, and was picking them off one by one. Classic tactics from someone who understood how pack hunters operated. Sound echoed through the corridor behind him, the soft scrape of something moving against stone. He spun, bringing his weapon to bear on empty air. His enhanced hearing picked up a dozen potential threat sources, from settling debris to thermal expansion in the ancient walls. In a normal environment, his sensors would have filtered out the false positives automatically. Here, surrounded by unknown technology and signal interference, every shadow could hide death. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision. Too fast for a clear target lock, but substantial enough to trigger his combat reflexes. He fired a spread of energy bolts down the corridor, the superheated air crackling with released power. Stone vaporized and metal screamed, but when the destruction cleared, he saw only empty space and scorch marks. "Come out, human!" he roared, his voice echoing through the ruins. "Face me directly. Your species may be clever, but you cannot match a Keth warrior in honest combat." Silence answered him, followed by a sound that made his blood run cold. Laughter. Soft, human laughter echoing from speakers hidden throughout the structure. "You want honest combat?" The voice was female, calm, with an accent that his translator identified as originating from Earth's North American continent. "I've been fighting honest combat while you've been playing games with helpless civilians." The words stung because they carried an uncomfortable truth. The Keth hunting consortium did indeed focus on non-military targets, beings who could provide sport without genuine risk. It was a business model, not warfare. But this human spoke as if she understood the difference. "Who are you?" he demanded, his weapon tracking shadows that might or might not contain threats. "Lieutenant Sarah Chun, Earth Alliance Colonial Marines, Deep Reconnaissance Unit." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the ruins themselves were speaking. "Serial number 774 Alpha Niner. And you, Velthik of the Hunting Consortium, are under arrest for violations of interstellar law regarding the capture and exploitation of sentient beings." Under arrest. The absurdity of it should have been laughable. A lone human attempting to arrest a Keth warrior in the middle of unexplored space, light years from any legal authority. But something in her voice suggested she was completely serious. "Your pack leader Zektar has been responsible for the disappearance of 17 human vessels over the past 3 standard Years, the voice continued, clinical and precise. 47 Earth Alliance personnel, including 12 children from the colony transport Esperanza. Their families deserve justice. Children. Velthic's grip tightened on his weapon. The consortium's clients did sometimes request younger specimens, but he had never asked what happened to them afterward. It was easier not to know, easier to think of the humans as just another resource to be harvested. You feel doubt, the human observed, as if she could read his thoughts. Good. Doubt means you still have something resembling a conscience. Your pack leader doesn't. I've been monitoring his communications for months, tracking his pattern of operations. Did you know he's already negotiating the sale of your next targets? A research station in the Tau Ceti system. 43 scientists, including a kindergarten class from the diplomatic families. The words hit harder than plasma fire. Velthic had joined the consortium for the thrill of the hunt, the challenge of tracking worthy prey across alien worlds. When had it become about harvesting children from research stations? My offer is simple, Sarah's voice continued. Surrender now, provide testimony about consortium operations, and I'll ensure you're treated according to interstellar conventions ***. The sensor readings were perfect. Too perfect, perhaps, but the Keth hunting pack didn't pause to consider such subtleties. Their prey moved through the dense undergrowth of Kepler 442b with the clumsy, noisy gait typical of mammals from the third planet of the Sol system. Humans, they called themselves. Soft, pink creatures with no natural weapons, no enhanced senses, no protective carapaces or energy shields. Zektar flexed his razor-sharp claws and tasted the air with his forked tongue. The human scent was strong here, mixed with the metallic tang of fear sweat and the chemical residue of primitive technology. His thermal sensors painted a clear picture of the creature's heat signature moving roughly 200 meters ahead. Stumbling through the alien forest like a lost calf. Maintain distance, he hissed into his cum unit, his serpentine voice carrying the authority of a pack leader who had claimed over 40 different species across 12 star systems. Let her wear herself down. Humans are known for their stubbornness, but their endurance is limited. His second-in-command, Velthic, acknowledged with a low growl. The massive reptilian warrior crouched behind a cluster of crystal formations, his camouflage system rendering him nearly invisible against the purple-tinged vegetation. The female appears to be military, pack leader. Her movements suggest training, though crude by galactic standards. All human military training is crude, Zektar replied dismissively. They still use kinetic weapons and chemical propellants. Their tactics are hundreds of years behind civilized species. This hunt will be over before the next moonrise. The truth was, Zektar had specifically requested a human target for this expedition. The Keth hunting consortium had recently expanded into the Orion Arm, and human specimens were becoming increasingly popular among the galaxy's elite predator species. They were rare enough to be valuable, but common enough that the Galactic Council turned a blind eye to their capture. The fact that humans had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel made them perfect prey, dangerous enough to be interesting, but primitive enough to be manageable. This particular human had been selected from a colonial survey team on the edge of known space. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, according to the intelligence files, a xenobiologist attached to the Earth Alliance's Deep Space Exploration Division. No genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements, no exotic training beyond what the humans laughably called basic survival skills. She had been separated from her team during what the files described as a routine sample collection mission, the perfect target for what Zektar intended to be a challenging, but ultimately successful hunt. The pack had been tracking her for 6 standard hours now, allowing her to maintain the illusion of escape, while gradually herding her toward the ancient ruins where they would make their final strike. The massive stone structures dating back to Kepler 442b's previous inhabitants would provide the perfect arena for the climactic confrontation. Zektar could already imagine the recording he would make of the final moments. The way the human's primitive courage would crumble when faced with the reality of superior predators. Pack leader, came another voice through the comm system. Hickstal, their tracker, was positioned on the high ground overlooking their prey's path. The human's movement pattern is ... curious. She appears to be following a deliberate route rather than fleeing randomly. Zektar paused, his thermal sensors confirming Hickstal's observation. The human was indeed following what appeared to be a planned path through the forest, moving with more purpose than panic. Elaborate, he commanded. She's avoiding optimal escape routes in favor of terrain that would typically be considered disadvantageous to the pursued party. Dense undergrowth, rocky outcroppings, areas with limited visibility. It's almost as if she's leading us somewhere specific. A low chuckle rumbled through Zektar's throat. Fear makes prey behave irrationally. She's probably reverting to instinctive behavior patterns, seeking shelter in confined spaces like a cornered animal. Maintain pursuit pattern. All units converge on coordinates Gamma 7 when she reaches the ruins. But even as he gave the order, something nagged at the back of Zektar's predatory instincts. In over 2 decades of hunting sentient species across the galaxy, he had learned to trust the subtle warnings that separated successful predators from dead ones. The human's behavior was indeed strange, but perhaps not in the way his subordinates suggested, Lieutenant. Sarah Chun moved through the alien forest with practiced efficiency. Her breathing steadied despite 6 hours of what appeared to be panicked flight. Her standard-issue Earth Alliance uniform was torn and dirty, her face streaked with mud and native plant residue. To any observer, she looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a lost scientist. Separated from her team, and desperately trying to survive in hostile territory, the performance was flawless because it wasn't entirely a performance. She was genuinely alone on an alien world, genuinely being hunted by creatures that wanted her dead or worse. The terror that sharpened her movements and quickened her pulse was real, but terror had been Sarah's companion for so long that she had learned to make it work for her rather than against her. Her official file listed her as a xenobiologist attached to Survey Team 7, and that wasn't a lie. What it didn't mention was that before joining the Earth Alliance's Exploration Division, she had spent 8 years in the Colonial Marines Deep Reconnaissance Unit. What it didn't mention was her service record during the Proxima Centauri conflict, or her classified operations in the Vega system. What it didn't mention was that she had volunteered for this particular mission specifically because intelligence reports suggested the area was frequented by alien hunting parties. The Earth Alliance needed to know what humanity was up against in the larger galaxy, and sometimes the only way to gather that intelligence was to let the enemy think they had an easy target. Sarah's wrist display showed the positions of her hunters with crystalline clarity. The microsensors she had been dropping along her path for the past 4 hours were providing a detailed tactical picture that would have impressed her old unit commanders. 3 primary contacts, designation Alpha, Beta, and Gamma, moving in a classic pack hunting formation. Probable species, Keth. Based on thermal signatures and movement patterns from intelligence briefings, the Keth were known quantities in Earth Alliance files. Reptilian, highly aggressive, technologically advanced but overconfident when dealing with species they considered primitive. They had been responsible for the disappearance of 17 human vessels over the past 3 years, though this was the first time Earth had managed to make contact with a hunting pack under control. Conditions. Sarah checked her equipment one final time as she approached the ancient ruins that dominated this section of the forest. Her sidearm was a standard Alliance plasma pistol, intentionally chosen for its primitive appearance despite its devastating effectiveness. Her survival kit contained items that would seem perfectly reasonable to alien observers, while hiding capabilities that would only become apparent when needed. Most importantly, her medical implant was broadcasting a steady stream of biometric data that painted her as increasingly exhausted and desperate. The ruins rose before her like broken teeth against the alien sky. Massive stone blocks carved by hands that had turned to dust millions of years before humans first looked up at the stars. The perfect place for cornered prey to make a final stand. The perfect place for overconfident predators to learn Why humans had earned their place among the stars not through superior technology, but through superior adaptability, Sektar felt the familiar surge of anticipation as his prey disappeared into the ancient structure. The ruins were a maze of collapsed chambers and narrow corridors, providing excellent cover for a desperate victim, but ultimately serving as a trap for anything foolish enough to seek shelter there. His pack had hunted in similar terrain dozens of times, and the outcome was always the same. "Final approach," he commanded, his claws extending to their full length. "Remember, the client wants her alive and undamaged. Disable, but do not kill unless absolutely necessary." The three Keth warriors converged on the ruins from different angles, their advanced sensors painting detailed images of the structure's interior. The human had taken cover in what appeared to be a central chamber, her heat signature clearly visible through the ancient stone. She was probably preparing some form of primitive ambush, maybe planning to use a bottleneck to even the odds. It was exactly the kind of desperate gambit his species expected from inferior prey. "Pack leader," Velthic's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "I'm detecting some anomalous readings from the target's position. Energy signatures that don't match standard human technology. Probably damaged equipment," Sektar replied without concern. "Human devices are notoriously unreliable under stress. Proceed with the plan." But as the three hunters entered the ruins, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators closing in on certain victory, none of them noticed the nearly invisible threads of molecular wire that had been carefully strung across their approach routes. None of them detected the microcharges that had been placed with surgical precision at structural weak points throughout the ancient building. None of them realized that the anomalous readings Velthic